Anything before I start?
I just want to thank you for presenting this webinar to everyone today, and thanks to the attendees for participating.
Okay.
That's all I have.
All right. Well, thank you. And then we'll get right into it because people want to learn about solar and solar laws. This presentation is going to focus on solar laws and the things that you can put in your solar laws. I'm going to touch base on a couple other things, but that's basically what we're going to do with this presentation. There's a chat feature. This is not, you can send chat messages, and Nicole, who's helping from my office, will let me know if there's a technical problem or if you have questions concerning. We're going to have a couple stopping points where we're going to have questions for you, but we'll move forward with this now. The presentation is going to be talking about the types of solar and how do they regulate, and then at the end we'll touch base on Article 10 and 94C. But before we start that, I'll introduce myself. Maybe should have done that sooner. I'm Drew Reilly. I work with Wendel. Wendel has been providing municipal services to communities for over 50 years. I've only been doing it for 35 years. I'm also a seeker expert. I have created lots of solar laws. I've represented communities on large scale municipal projects for Article 10 projects. But one thing I want to say here, anything I say here, we're dealing with local laws and ordinances. I am not an attorney. I can't give you legal advice. I can give you my experiences with these laws, but I cannot give you legal advice. As I said before, I have to talk a little bit about my experiences run from small systems to very large systems, and even large scale ones that are over 1,000 acres, 2,000 acre solar projects. Like I said, I've written probably over 10 local zoning laws and updated them. We've been updating laws over the last year, and we're going to talk about why it's important to update your laws. I've also processed projects through those laws, and hence that's why we ended up adjusting some of those laws, because we learned some things through the processing of all these different types of solar laws. I do also want to state that it's important to understand that Wendel has an energy group and has engineers here that do provide some consultation on solar projects and to solar companies. So we understand both sides of the business. I don't want to just say that my work is mainly focused on municipalities, but Wendel has experiences working for private companies and doing actual solar and other green energy projects. So we understand the impacts of the laws that are written also from a developer standpoint. First thing I want to do is find out, typically when I'm face-to-face with people, I want to find out who's in the room. So Nicole's going to just have a couple questions for those of you who can answer, we can find out. So the first question is up. If take a couple seconds, and if you could answer that, it'd be helpful. How's that going, Nicole?
Oh, we got about 85% in. It's starting to slow down. Give it maybe 5 more seconds.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll end it. Here we go.
Okay, so the results are, as we thought, most people are planning board members. We have a couple town board members. We have some ZBA members, very important. A lot of these go to and a code official and some others. So that's good. Why don't you launch the next question? Those will help me with my presentation.
Okay.
Okay, Nicole?
Info still coming in. Yep. Give it a couple more seconds here. There you go.
Okay. Quite a few of you do not have solar laws. Some of them have them less than a year. Some of them are a little newer, and one has greater than. Okay, so that gives me that a lot of you do not have solar laws, probably just governed through their existing zoning code. All right, last question, Nicole.
Okay. Yep.
I want to know if you have a project before you now. There's lots of them out there. Article 10 size, you would know they're very, very large projects over several hundred acres in size, and they're a different process, and we'll talk about that. The other large ones are typically 40 to 60 acres or 80 acres in size, and then the backyard units you know about.
Okay, it's trickling in here. I'll give it a couple seconds.
Okay.
There you go.
Right. Most of the people do not have a project before them. They have some large projects, which I presume there's a lot of those large scale projects that are Article 10 size, and then 5 of you have Article 10 size projects. Okay, good. All right, let's get back to the presentation. I have an idea that helps me decide where to spend more time on. And so you have that. And my slide doesn't seem to be advancing now.
You might have to click back into it, Drew.
There we go. Okay. So the types of solar installations, I kind of consider 4 types of solar installations, and we've kind of talked about them in the questions. But you have the rooftop building mounted, building integrated units that you've probably been seeing for at least 10, 15, 20 years. And ground mounted units, sometimes people can't put them on the roofs, they put them in their backyards. And then we have the ground mounted units, which are the larger ones, which are typically done by a private company coming in and renting or buying land and putting up ground mounted units. And then of course we have the industrial scale. And we'll talk about that in a bit about why I think it's important to have those 4 type of categories. So I'm going to go quickly through the smaller type installation because you've been regulating those for years. So usually, typically, rooftop mounted units have been regulated in your communities through building permits. Not even have a local law, you basically come in and get a building permit if you want to put them on your rooftop. You can, though, put them in a solar law, and you can call these what we call tier 1 projects, and you can put some additional requirements for the building inspector to know that, hey, we want to see materials about glare, we want to see information about the building code issues, the fire health and safety issues. And I've seen some communities go as far as in historic areas basically say they need some issues dealing with aesthetics. Now, if you're going to go the route of asking about aesthetic issues with rooftop units, then you're probably going to have some regulatory process. So you may have a requirement for site plan approval for certain types of rooftop units. But mostly what I see out there is that these are done through building permit. I've seen on a rare occasions that some of the building rooftop ones require some level of site plan approval because there's a discretionary decision involved, like aesthetics, things like that. All right, we're going to go to the next level, which is similar, still what I consider a tier 1 project, which is building mounted, kind of shows an example on there to the side of a building, or building integrated, which is kind of a new thing that's been coming upwards, where they actually roof shingles are made as solar panels, and they just get installed on the rooftops they act as the shingle and as your solar panel. Again, I think they meet the kind of same requirements. Either you have them through building permit, or if you're concerned about aesthetics or something like that, you can regulate through a process such as site plan approval. But like I said, I think you've been dealing with these. If you're going to write a new solar law, you can call these what we call tier 1 projects and have certain requirements for them, either through the building department, or if necessary, if it's necessary, have it go through a site plan approval. But like I said, 99% of the time, these are done through building permit, but at least you can have some standards in there to help your building inspector issue those permits. So the next level is the ground mounted small scale, which I kind of refer to as tier 2, and we're going to talk about later. Even the New York State sample law talks about these being tier 2. These are for people who I either can't put a rooftop unit on or whatever, and I want to put up a small unit in my backyard. These are typically accessory structures. These are not structures that are going on a vacant piece of property. They're going associated with a use and helping to reduce their energy bill for that use that's there. So again, some communities regulate this again through the building permit process and treat it as an accessory structure. So that again, just like if you were building a garage, that you could put a solar panel installation as long as you met those minimum requirements, setback requirements. You can establish new ones in your solar law, but again, only require building permits. Or you can regulate, and a lot of communities do, more than half of them do now for these type of installations, regulate them through site plan approval. So even if I'm a residential homeowner and I want to put these up in my backyard, it may be required for me to come in and get site plan approval, and the regulations for that will be in your solar law. You can regulate size, setbacks, height, limitations on tree removal, glare, et cetera, those things. And again, this is home rule, so you can, and I'm going to say that a lot, you can put what you want in there. But you don't want to, from an energy person standpoint, I don't want to see these overly restricted, but you can restrict them. You don't have to allow them everywhere. You can have restrictions for them. Some communities I dealt with that have very small lots thought it was not a good thing to allow these on those small lots. So again, you can regulate them anywhere you want. Again, I'm moving through these quickly because I want to get to the larger projects. So the next scale of larger projects is these ground mounted larger scale. And these are typically, I think in the poll, we saw those happening, is that companies are coming to communities and basically saying we're renting or leasing land or buying land so that we can put up 20 acres, 30 acres, 40 acres, 70 acres of solar panels on that site. So like with any zoning code, and we'll call these tier 3, you can regulate those. You're going to say what zoning districts that you allow them in. And when I make this statement here for the first time is that as a planner, zoning must be in accordance with a comprehensive plan. So you want to look at your comprehensive plan and say why you're regulating, what are the reasons why you're regulating these tier 3 or not allowing them in certain areas, et cetera. You can have different processes for approval. You can have site plan, you can have special use permit. I see most communities doing a special use permit for these type of projects. You can limit the size. You can say for tier 3, it only allows up to 50 acres. And then we're going to talk about later, this larger scale, this tier 4 size. They don't necessarily have to be the Article 10 projects, but you can say these tier 3 projects are up to a certain size. You can have a long list of technical requirements, which we're going to talk about later, those things that you can require in your code. You can also have construction related requirements, bonds, insurances, et cetera. And I've even seen for tier 3 ones, host community agreements requiring that you have a host community agreement for these type of facilities. Tier 3, we're going to talk a little bit about more, but I want to talk about, again, all those things when we talk about all the different issues that there are with these type of solar projects. Nicole, I think we have one more question of the audience about what their priority issue is about what are the biggest concerns about solar projects. And again, I apologize, we only have a few things to pick from. There may be other things there, but we try to think of some of the things that we typically hear from. This also gives me a chance to catch up on my notes.
We'll give it a few more seconds here.
Okay. And by the way, just to make this a little more challenging, this is not the latest revised presentation that I had. So some of the slides are different out of order. So, and that's my fault. So aesthetics, smaller, public health and safety, impact to neighbors seems to be a high one too. Financials a little small, and then there's other, and we'll probably get to some of those other issues, and you can always put in the chat if I'm missing when I go through this long list of issues that I've heard about with solar projects. So thank you, Nicole. So I know it's at the top of the list here is glare, but it seems to be one that's always brought up when a solar project comes in. Glare is, I think you can address it fairly straightforward in your zoning code by just requiring anti-reflective materials on there. And you can put some standards in there for glare, but most of the modern solar panels do not glare. I mean, I've known ones in the past. I have communities that have some that really glare, but if the solar panel is glaring a lot, it's not working very well, because the idea is for them to absorb that energy and from the sun. So glare can be put in your law and should be put in there, that you require anti-reflective materials on the solar panels. Setbacks tend to be another huge issue with communities, is how they're located on the property, how far back they have to be set. And it kind of goes hand in hand with the bullet about lot coverage. So if you're requiring and again, it's going to be dependent upon the zoning of the property, but I've seen setbacks vary from anywhere from 30-foot side yard setbacks to 100 to 150-foot side yard setbacks or more for projects such as this. And the lights just went down in the room because I'm not moving around. Setbacks are an important issue. Look at them. What I would recommend you not do is, some of the communities in their solar laws basically refer to the underlying zoning that exists on the property and say, we'll just meet the underlying zoning setback and lot coverage requirements. But these are unique projects. And typically if you have in a agricultural residential district, you may have a setback requirement of 20 feet or a lot coverage of 10 or 20%. That may not make sense for a solar project. So I would not recommend you refer to the underlying zoning, but set specific standards for each one of the districts that you're going to be allowing these larger projects in. So for setbacks and lot coverage, set up your own standards. And for lot coverage, to have a 10% or 15% lot coverage, it's my opinion that you're basically saying you don't want a solar project. Because think about it, if I'm doing a 50-acre solar project, that means I would have to lease or buy 500 acres of land to accomplish that 50 acres of solar on there. I think if you have the proper setback requirements, then that'll meet your concerns. Especially, for example, if you have a 50-acre project and you have 50-foot or 75-foot or 100-foot setbacks, the lot coverage is only going to be, if you do the math, is only going to be in the range of, depending upon the configuration of the lot, you're only going to be in the range of 50-60% anyway. So, and that's probably more important is the setback than the actual lot coverage issue. And I think you can address the setback and lot coverage issue with the next one on there, which is having good standards for screening and aesthetics in your law about how they should be screened and aesthetic requirements of the project. And again, I'm going through these. We could spend 20 minutes or a half hour on each one of these, but I wanted to get through. These are the top issues that are dealt with. Impacts to agricultural. For the bigger projects especially, there's concerns about, and a lot of the communities have put in restrictions in there about impacting statewide importance or prime agricultural soils and not impacting those soils and trying to preserving more of those soils in your town. If you're graced with those important soils in your community, you can have restrictions on that. There's a whole litany of them. And if people want to email me, they're welcome to, and I'll send you some great sample laws about how they address impacts to agricultural. Property values comes up a lot, and there's a lot of information on the internet about impacts to property values. All I'm saying is be careful in your zoning laws. Zoning laws typically do not deal with issues of property values. So be careful, seek good legal advice if you're going to write something about property value impacts, because it's typically not something you'll see in a standard zoning code. You're supposed to be addressing that issue when you decide where and how you place solar in your community and what district. So my advice is be careful with that. Seek good legal advice. There are also issues about decommissioning pilots, host community agreements, et cetera. These are standard ones in all laws are decommissioning. You want to make sure that when the project is over, that those units are removed from the property. You have bonds and other things put in place to make sure the property removed. It kind of relates to agricultural, because Ag and Markets has a very good document on how they would like to see, especially on agricultural properties, how they would like them to be returned to their original conditions after the projects are over, which could be 25, 30 years from now. I'm going to go to the next one. And again, I'm going to have to, keeps freezing out on me here. Okay. Next one is tree clearing. That's come up a lot. Typically, these solar companies for these larger projects are trying to find properties that have minimal amount of trees. They do not want to spend the money in removing trees, and it kind of is something they don't want to do. But I've seen projects where they have to clear trees. So you can have requirements in your law about minimizing tree clearing, or you can have mitigations for that tree clearing if they have to remove trees from the property to do their projects. So that's an important issue that's addressed. Battery storage is coming up in a lot of the projects now, the larger projects. What my recommendation is, and we got to do a separate seminar on a battery storage law, but you can have a separate battery storage law. Matter of fact, it's highly recommended now that the building codes now address battery storage, and you can decide how these units are going to be installed in a separate law. You can refer to it in your solar law and say we have a separate law for battery storage. Battery storage can be done independently now of a solar project or another green energy project, or it can be part of a solar project. So I think you can address it that way. Economic impacts. Another issue that's not normally dealt with in zoning codes, but you do deal with it in the seeker process. So you can put some requirements for looking at economic impacts. And mostly they relate to the loss of agricultural land, et cetera, and how that may impact the community. Native vegetation, that refers to, you can require, if you know when you put in solar panels, what happens underneath the solar panels. You can have requirements for native vegetation. You can have requirements for pollinators, et cetera. So again, you can add all those requirements in your law. And then typically in your solar law, you're going to have site plan requirements. What are the requirements for submittals for these projects? And don't worry, I'm going to come back to this on how you put this law together, but these are just the top issues that I have seen over the last 5 to 7 years of things that communities want to make sure that they address. So what things are you asking for that developer for a certain size project to submit with their site plan? You don't want to refer to standard site plan because they don't typically address projects like this. So you may want to have specific requirements for what has to be submitted for your site plan. Noise issues come up, and that you can have regulations in your solar law. Typically they're related to the inverters, but for the real large projects, you may see a substation having to be put in, and those are the noise generating parts of these projects, the inverters and the substations. And again, you can have regulations in your code about noise restrictions. One of the clever things that a lot of the solar companies do, and I think it's good, is that the inverters are placed in the center of the project, as far away from the edges of the project as possible, so that by the time the noise, again, it's a low level noise, it's not a loud noise, but by the time it reaches the property line and beyond, it's below any levels that would typically be required under a noise ordinance if you have a local noise ordinance or any kind of code requirement. Standard one we see in most of the regulations is requiring underground utilities, that you don't have overhead lines, that everything be buried underground for these projects. Solar sky space is an interesting one. Some communities have written in their laws that the companies have to buy solar rights from adjoining properties, et cetera. I think the easiest way to do this is say that, look, it's not a requirement of the town or the community for solar sky space, but it's up to that applicant to determine whether they need to purchase some solar sky space or some agreements of adjoining property owners to make sure that nothing is put up that is blocking the solar panels. But typically with their setbacks, they're not running into that problem. So solar sky space, there are some things you can put in your regulations. O&M plans, extremely important. Most communities in their solar laws are going to say, okay, we want to see an operation and maintenance plan. How are you taking care of this facility? Depending upon what you put in there, are you mowing this facility? What are your maintenance schedules? What are the things that you're going to do to operate this facility? Because typically these are built and it's not like there's a person there on a daily basis, but how is this facility being operated and maintained? So that's a standard one that people are asking for, is operation and maintenance plans. What's not on this list is one of the things you need to deal with in your solar law is, because they're all so unique in their proposals and in the property that they're going on, sizes and shapes and types and whatever. So you're going to create all these rules and regulations. And as you know, typically if in your zoning code, if they can't meet something, they have to go to the zoning board of appeals. You can put in your laws and in your zoning law and your solar law that the planning board or the town board, whoever has site plan or special use permit requirements, can waive the requirements or modify the requirements, as long as they're, typically there's mitigations offered or other things that are offered why they can't meet that requirement. So it's up to you how you want to handle it. If you don't have a waiver clause in your laws after you write all these, then all these, if they can't meet them, would have to be appealed to the zoning board of appeals. And then the zoning board of appeals would have to deal with that issue. And they'd have to rule on using the 5 criteria. If it's an area variance, setback issue, et cetera, or removal of trees, they would have to deal with it as an area variance. Typically, these are not going to zoning board of appeals for use variances, although of late I've seen a couple where the applicant approaches the town says it's not allowed in that zoning district, and they have gone to the zoning board of appeals to try to get a use variance. And I noticed we had some ZBA members, and you probably know that that's going to be a difficult path to accomplish, is someone leasing a property or purchasing a property and then saying, I need a use variance, and I cannot get any reasonable economic return on that piece of property. But you're very familiar with the criteria for use variances if you're a zoning board member. So typically, if you write in your zoning ordinance it's not allowed in a zoning district, I have not seen a lot of companies try to go the route of getting a use variance. I'm going to come back to some of these, but I wanted to get to the point of your actual law itself. And I'm just checking my time. I'm a half hour in, which is good. I figured I would get to about a half hour here or 35 minutes into a presentation here. So I'm doing pretty good on that. So I'm talking about all these requirements that you have to put in a solar law. There is a great document out there that's published by NYSERDA, and I would highly recommend it. It's a model solar energy law that they provide. And it is a great law because it admits in the fact that it provides you all the required sections, all the things we've talked about here, but also allows you to add to that law. They say right in there that it's going to be unique to each community. So you're going to have an intent section. They give you a sample intent section. Like any good law, you're going to have an intent section. But again, you can incorporate those things from your comprehensive plan. What is the intent? What is the town trying to accomplish in writing their solar law? You're going to have a definition section. And by the way, very important section of your solar law is going to be definitions, because there are a lot of questions about, I'll give an example, lot coverage. How do you define lot coverage in your community? With solar panels, some of the communities define lot coverages as all those areas of impervious surface. Well, if you understand solar panels, they're raised above the ground, and DEC in determining runoff from solar panels considers solar panels that are not impervious surface because the water hits them, rolls underneath to the ground, that is basically a pervious surface. So how do you count that? So some people have defined lot coverage as just, let's just make it simple. It's the area within the fenced area of the solar project is your lot coverage requirement if you're going the route of that. So very important to have definitions. One of the other important things you want to define is if you're going to define different types of systems. Most of my laws that I've written, we've defined them as 4 tiers of systems, as I talked about. The tier 1 being those ones that are typically by building permit, which are your roof mounted and building integrated ones, and tier 2 being the ground mounted ones, but smaller in scale, which we're going to talk about. And then tier 3 being the larger ones that these companies are proposing, and then tier 4 being above a certain size that you know is going to impact your community, whether it's 100 acres or whatever. They may also include the Article 10 or 94C projects, which we're going to talk about. So you need good definitions. You're going to decide where they're allowed and what the processes are. You know, are the processes special use permits, site plan approval, et cetera. So you'll have that in your law. So again, this is in the model law. You're going to have some bulk zoning requirements, all those setback requirements you normally see in a zoning law. Like I firmly suggest, do not refer to the underlying zoning. Create your own laws, because these are unique projects. Create your own setback requirements, all those other things, knowing what you know about solar projects. They are unique. They aren't like typically putting a building up on a piece of property. You're going to have submittal materials. Those are the site plan requirements we've talked about. And then you're going to have those other requirements, including the specifics to your community. Those are things you can do. So this model law says if you have important things, if you have unique things in your community, you can add those things. And you'll see a lot of communities have some unique issues, like they may have a important ridge line or whatever. That should be talked about in your law, about how that would be addressed, et cetera, in your law. Or I work in Niagara County, has the escarpment and how the escarpment would be dealt with solar projects. So you can make those things that are specific to your community. You also have the general requirements section of the law, which you all should have, and they give samples in there, but you can talk to your town attorney or your municipal attorney. You're going to have a severability clause in case one section of your law gets thrown out, that the whole law doesn't get thrown out. What do you make sure you have the statement about conflicts, that if this conflicts with some other section of your code or law somewhere, that this law overrides that, or is it the most restrictive law applies? You're going to have enforcement. I always know enforcement is one of the most important parts of any law, is that how you're enforcing this law. And then, of course, any penalties. And again, seek good legal advice for those sections of your law, but there are good samples in this model law. And again, if anybody emails me or emails Sarah, I know Sarah has a copy, but this model law is a great starting point for any law. And then you can go out and get samples from other communities. But I think it makes sense. I'm as a planner for dozens of communities, I like to see laws that, and so do developers, that it's easy to follow that all of them at least have the same format. You may have your own specific requirements, but at least there's a format required. And also this law will help you that you won't forget certain things that are important to your local solar law. So this is kind of a repeat of what I was just talking about, but I think it's, the first thing you have to do when you form a committee or a group that's doing a solar law is understand those different types of categories and make sure everybody understands the different types and how you may want to delineate those what I consider 4 different types. You want to put together restrictions in the different zoning districts are. You know your zoning districts very well. You want to put what those approval processes are. I won't get into it here, but I've seen incentive zoning laws concerning solar, basically communities saying that they want solar in their community, and to accomplish solar in a community, this is the process that you follow under what they call incentive zoning. I've also seen communities go as far as pre-permitting areas for solar, but that's not for today's presentation. Those are typically very complicated laws. We talked about the restrictions on the type of soils or impacting agricultural, other unique features. Take out your comp plan, any maps you have about what are those unique features in your community before you start writing those laws. Get good advice from your attorney and bond counsels, et cetera, about bonds and insurances. If you're going to do property value, again, I don't recommend it in your zoning law, but you can do it as a separate requirement. And then I end with the home rule statement. We're in New York State. Home rule allows you to set up laws the way you want to set up laws within your community. Again, be careful with that though, is that don't get outside the things, like I said, that you're typically allowed to regulate in zoning. Or like I said, I'm very nervous about property value impacts because it's not typically something you regulate in a zoning law. But you can get very unique. I've seen very unique zoning laws as it relates to solar and other types of things in communities. All right. With that said, I want to do an introduction to the next slide because some of you have these larger projects. Right now, these larger projects, and they're what they call 25 megawatts or larger. By the way, I want to do an aside here. I have a couple minutes to do an aside. When you're regulating solar in your community, the sizes, the tier 1, 2, 3, 4, I've seen a lot of it in some of the sample laws related to the megawatt value of the project. As a land use planner and someone who writes a lot of zoning and laws and land use laws, a land use is about size of projects. So typically in solar laws, we try to regulate them on size and not related to some number that means nothing to a lot of people. A 25 megawatt project that doesn't equate to people, or a 10 megawatt or 5 megawatt. Plus, as the solar industry gets more efficient and the panels get more efficient, that number may not equate to what you think are the sizes of your projects. And again, I have to move, otherwise the lights go out in this room. So I would talk about, when you're setting up those categories, the sizes of projects within your community. So you want to, for these large Article 10 projects, that was kind of my precursor to those. You all know that these are regulated through the Article 10 process. There are no local approvals required. Basically, there's a process that involves the communities, and I don't want to, we could spend a whole hour talking about the Article 10 process, but we don't want to talk about that because most of the projects are going to convert to the newer process. So, but you should get good legal advice and professional help with these. The process does allow you to get intervener funds to help you pay for that professional advice to give input to these projects. They try to meet your local zoning, or they can get waivers from them, but there's no local approvals needed. Why the state has amended, I'm not getting into the pros and cons, but the state mostly amended the process because it was taking too long for projects to get through the Article 10 process. Some 5-7 years, some projects have been in it. So they wanted to try to pass a law to help expedite, but in the words of the state, make a good process that hopefully gets good projects. So the projects that are currently within Article 10, they can switch over to the new process. I think a lot of those companies were waiting to see about the new rules and regulations that were being published to see whether they're going to be switching over to the new 94C process. So I might as well skip over to the next slide, which is this new 94C process, which is the process that's going to replace, and I believe, a lot of the Article 10 projects and any newer large scale projects, 20, 25, I think it's 25 megawatts or larger. I thought the original legislation was 20, but over a certain size will go under this new Article 94C process. The new office was created. The Office of Renewable Energy Siting is a new office that's running all this, and there's all different programs being run under this new law. The law was passed in, I believe, March of, if I got these dates wrong, March of 2020, but they have until 1 year later, which would be around March of 2021, to establish the rules and regulations. That's why you're not seeing 94C projects yet, because the regulations have not been adopted yet, the rules and regulations that are going to guide this process. There are draft of these regulations out. If you really want to have fun, you can get copies of the draft regulations. I have them, and read through them, and you can provide comments to this. I know there's organizations and others that are going to be providing comments to these, or I think the comments are due in the November timeframe, and then there'll be possibly amendments made to that process in there. So familiarize yourself if you have one of these large projects. So why are we sitting here today? One of the major reasons why, and I want to get across to people in all communities, whether you have an Article 10 or you think you're going to get a 94C process, is that one of the things that the state, the county, and other officials are recommending, and I agree with it in reading that, is that because these projects don't have a local regulatory approval, they are charged with trying to meet the local zoning of a town. So what I'm advising to most of the communities that may have these larger scale projects, or even ones that are, is that you have a good up-to-date zoning law that is reflective of your comprehensive plan. And if you have an outdated plan, maybe try to do a minor update to that comprehensive plan to try to address these issues, so that you have facts when these companies come in and propose these projects. If your rules are arbitrary and capricious, they're going to be asking for waivers from them because they believe they're rules that they don't make any sense. So, but I think, and others think, that if you have a good, well-founded zoning code solar law that's based upon a good, well-founded comprehensive plan, that those projects will have to try to meet those requirements the best they can. So it's your way of having as much influence over these projects as possible. And I won't get into the technical, I do not want to get, because they're not finalized yet, the technical legal aspects of how they have to try to meet these local laws, and how they have to try to meet the other local rules governing these projects. So again, you get good input from Association of Towns, and I'm sure Southern Tier West and others can help communities understand if they're going to have these larger projects and what this 94C process means. Supposedly, the 94C means that once an application is made and deemed complete, it's 1 year to receive approvals. And if they don't have approvals within that 1 year time frame, it's automatic approvals. It's an automatic approval of that project. So again, we comment on those 94C, have good zoning regulations in place for those. So I'm about 15 minutes, and I wanted to get Nicole, do we have, or Sarah, do we have some questions that have come up? Or I can go back, there's certain other things I wanted to talk about, but I wanted to stop here and give a chance to make sure I'm addressing. If you're attending a seminar, a lot of people sometimes have a specific question they want answered.
There
I haven't seen any
questions right now, but people can type them in the little question and answer box.
Okay, Nicole, you don't see anything, Nicole, that's come in?
Nope, nothing yet.
Okay, all right, so let's go back to, again, I skipped through some of these big issues, and maybe I'll touch base on agricultural impacts. Refer to Ag and Markets. The State Department of Ag and Markets has some good rules and regulations that you can build upon. They mostly focus on construction-related impacts to agricultural and the decommissioning, bringing the property back. But we're also trying to establish rules and regulations to try to avoid those prime or statewide important agricultural lands. Some of my communities are establishing areas that, for example, like orchards, very important orchards within their community. Those aren't easy to recover, and that industry may be extremely important to the community. So you may want to, in your local laws, address that issue, and in your law about trying to minimize those impacts to important agricultural lands. I've even seen some communities look at putting an overlay district over those important agricultural areas that would restrict solar and other type of uses in those areas. But again, it's going to be difficult because farmers see this as a way of, and other property owners see this as a way of making ends meet, and saving that agricultural soils and lands, and that you would be taking that away by doing that. But I think if you have those prime agricultural lands in your community orchards and other that are generating, I think it would make sense to have an overlay or restricting some of those highly productive and important agricultural lands in your community. So again, I think you want to look at that. One of the other issues is we talk about aesthetics, cultural resources, looking at important physical features in your property. If you have tourism related uses, some important cultural resources in your community, you may want to restrict or make sure that they're not being aesthetically impacted by these projects. So again, that's related to your particular community. I'll touch base, and I don't want to give advice, but pilots. You all know that typically pilots are not discussed in zoning laws. You have to opt out. Right now, solar installations basically are exempt, have exemptions from taxation. A community can opt out of that, but whether you opt out or not, typically they are negotiating a pilot. I just had a community today, got a letter in the mail from a solar company basically saying we're giving you a 60-day notice to let you know that we're proposing a project in your community. And what that 60-day notice is about is that you need to respond, especially if you have not opted out, to tell them that you will want a pilot agreement with that. So that's an important feature to understand. It doesn't necessarily have to go in your law, and it shouldn't really, I think, go in your law, but understand what your options are with that. What you can put in your law is host community agreements, which are not pilots, but they are typically on the larger scale projects that they get involved in host community agreements. And we could talk about that for half an hour. And I have some samples of host community agreement and how that would accomplish. Again, understand why communities are doing that. I'll be very straightforward about that, is that in a pilot situation, typically the community is not getting a lot of money in the pilots. If there's taxes being paid of $10,000, $20,000 a year, the majority of that pilot is going to the school district and to the county. It depends upon your tax structure, and the communities are getting smaller taxing benefits from that. But I think host community agreements can help with that. And again, that's personal opinion and opinions of some others that have created these laws. Trying to think, are there other hazardous materials? We didn't talk about that. I hear a lot and see a lot on the internet about solar panels having hazardous materials. I think there were some solar panels years ago that had cadmium in them, but I think almost all modern solar panels do not have any hazardous materials. You can put something in your law if you're concerned about that, and say that they have to submit the MSDS or sheets proving that there are no hazardous materials. But my understanding of modern solar panels is that they do not contain any hazardous materials. But if you want to, you can include something in your law saying that you would want to see some submittals on that, proving that there are no hazardous materials in the components of the project.
Hey, Drew, we've had a couple questions come in. I'm not sure if you've seen them.
No, go ahead. Why don't you, what are they?
Sure, I am. I'll read them to you. The first one you may have just addressed with the pilot conversation, but do many projects have host community agreements in addition to pilot agreements, and how are they typically determined?
If you have, like I said, in your zoning law, you really should not talk about pilots. I've been told taxing is not an issue that can go in a zoning code, but I've seen it referred to there. But you can do host community agreements, so you can have both. A company is still going to apply for a pilot. They're going to apply for a pilot because they want to get a pilot with the school district and with the county and other taxing entities and whatever. But a host community agreement can go beyond that. You as the host community could say, well, we would like to see these benefits. They could be monetary, they could be other. Again, I do not want to give you legal advice at this point, but talk to legal counsel on that. We're seeing a lot more of host community agreement requirements being put in local laws and ordinances. The pilots, again, are just strictly, it's based upon, and again, you can negotiate a pilot and and your IDA is going to do that, whether it's the county IDA or local IDA, but the pilots are usually based upon the tax structure that exists. So you can have a host community agreement and a pilot. And like I said, what I've seen is opting out doesn't help you because they're still going to want to negotiate a pilot, or they're basically, some are just going to say, nope, we're not going to do a project in their community, or they're going to argue about the assessed value of that installation. Again, I'm not an expert on that. Please seek good advice on that. Nicole, what was the other question?
We have, looks like 4 more questions. The next question is, when do they consider a 94C approval time to begin?
I'm sorry, say that again.
When do they consider a 90C approval time to begin?
It's going to be, well, first of all, the regulations, rules and regulations have to go in effect. By law, they have to be in effect by, I believe, the end of March of 2021. It could be April, it could be March, but it's around that time frame. Once those laws go into effect, then the applicants, and they're working on them now, they're working on getting all the requirements of 94C. So that time frame of 1 year is when they make a completion to the state of New York, and it's determined complete, is my understanding. Again, that could change, but my understanding is that once a completed application is made to the state and is determined complete, the state has 1 year to approve that project, or it's a default approval. So the issue is, what is going to be a complete application? What's important to the communities, and why we were talking about this, is that part of that is, and they're already starting with the community, trying to get letters from the community saying they're completely in conformance with all their local laws. And if they're not in conformance, how are you meeting that? Because I think part of the completed application is either them saying they've met and they're meeting all your requirements, or in the case of the completed, they may be saying, we need a waiver of one of these requirements because we believe it's burdensome to the project. And again, there's a whole process in there for determining that, and I don't want to get into that. There's a legal process involved in that. So again, completion is when they determine a complete application, 1 year. Any other questions?
We do have a bunch. Next question. Is there any limitation to what you can require in terms of restoring the site at the end of its life? I'm thinking of digging out foundations.
Yeah. Very good point. No, decommissioning plan can require removal of everything from the site. Typically, the poles are driven in and those can be removed. And if it's agricultural land, Ag and Markets is going to require that anyway for them to return it to agricultural conditions. The only real foundations they have some foundations for some of the inverter units, et cetera, and you can make them remove those. I mean, if that's the requirement of the town to remove it completely. Agricultural is a little easier. When it's not agricultural, then okay, what is returning it to original condition? If they remove trees from the site, what are you asking them to do? Ag and Markets give good direction on agricultural property, but non-agricultural property, I think it's got to be clearly written in your law what your decommissioning plan is requiring and what the returning of the site is going to be. So your local law would set that, especially for non-agricultural lands. Okay.
So, Drew, we do have a few more questions. I'm not sure if you've got time to get to them or if you want to maybe reach out personally to these individuals.
We have a couple more minutes. Is any of them different than we talked about pilots and decommissioning?
Yep, I'll keep going down the list. So this person's setting up their question here. So very rural town, no village, no industry, light grid wires. Will this probably preclude large tier 3 and 4 installations with a limited collection system?
Yeah, great question. And for those who want, in this NYSERDA model law, NYSERDA has a website here you can go on to and find. They have hosting capacity maps, which can give you an idea for your community of whether you even have capacity for these type of projects. And that's where the solar companies are going to too. So that's one of the things, if you can note Nicole and Sarah, we can send them this website from NYSERDA and you can go on and find out. This may not be an issue in your community because you may not have the capacity to have these type of systems in your community. So there is a map generated by NYSERDA that's available that shows capacity maps of approximate where these type of larger systems could go. So excellent question.
Okay, two more questions.
Yep.
How dangerous are the storage units typically used with large-scale projects?
So we're talking about battery storage here. That's why there's new regulations, there's new building code regulations. All your building inspectors have gone to training on that. And that is my recommendation. Again, the state has a model battery storage law because these can be lithium ion batteries, and we've heard about lithium ion. So you can put strong regulations together for the installation of battery storage systems. They can either be, and by the way, battery storage can be part of a solar project, or they can just be independent projects. We've seen now people just proposing battery storage units. And there's a way to make money off of that. So there are battery storage units out there. So my advice is to start with that model law and build upon that law and put in criteria. Obviously, you want good input from your fire departments, your code officials, and even from your county code officials to make sure that they're being done right, because there are new regulations out about battery storage units, and you're going to see more of these. The trend is to go to battery storage units, even replacing generator systems. Instead of having a generator, you have a battery storage unit. Okay, another question?
One more question we have. Can you talk more about New York State Office of Renewable Energy Siting seeking consultants?
Yeah, that was on my slide. Very good point. Part of this legislation that was proposed, that was put in place back in March of this past year, included not only this issue of 94C and that, but included other things that the state has been charged with. The state is charged with finding shovel-ready sites for these projects. So they're going to hire consultants and go out and try to find shovel-ready sites for these type of projects. They're investigating brownfield sites and whatever. The state is also going to have to, you can imagine, to process all these projects. I mean, that was one of the things I questioned when they put the regulations together, is that does the state have the staff to be processing all these projects and having it done within a year time frame? So they're going to go out and get consultants to help them review this work. So that's kind of this new office. They're set up, charged with running these programs. It's not only 94C, but these other things that the state is trying to accomplish. So they're going to be hiring consultants to help them with that, because they need additional staff to help them do this. There's a lot of things that have to be put in place that our legislators pass these, with the lights again, pass these rules. They have to get these things in place within a certain time period. So they're getting assistance to do that. All right. I think we're almost at our full hour. I'm sure there's tons of other questions. You could spend 2-3 hours on this. And Sarah, you'll have my email address. If people want to reach out to us, we can get, like I said, web addresses. I can work with you about additional information, the sample solar law, and then I can provide other samples. If you have other questions, please reach out. This is, I think, is extremely important to communities right now, having good solar laws, not only for the small ones, but if you're going to have these larger projects, 20 acres, 30 acres, 40, 50 acres, projects proposed in your community that don't fall under the state regulations, you need to have good rules and regulations about them. And again, home rule, if they don't fall under 94C or Article 10, it's your rules. But I have to say this as an energy person and person who's interested in sustainability. These are important projects. Try not to write laws that typically just exclude them from your community, but legislate them in a way that makes sense. That's my closing comment on that.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew and Nicole. I appreciate your help in doing this, and I'm going to post your presentation on our website and email it to everyone. So I will forward you the emails. I think Nicole has most of them, but.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining our seminar today. Thank you.